Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into how a massive trading company, the East India Company, well, it basically flipped a switch and became the ruler and chief tax collector for a huge territory, Bengal.
And there's a really specific date for that switch, isn't there? August 12th, 1765. That's when the Mughal emperor granted the company the Diwani.
The Diwani, right, the authority to be the head financial administrator for Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. It sounds almost bureaucratic, but it was revolutionary.
Absolutely. It wasn't just politics, it was a complete economic overhaul almost overnight.
Yeah, because before 1765, the company had to physically ship gold and silver from Britain to buy Indian goods. Things like, fine cottons and silks.
Exactly. They were paying into India. After 1765, that completely stops.
So the money they collected in Bengal as revenue now paid for the goods they shipped out to Britain.
Precisely. It shifted from trade, more or less, to direct extraction. And the sources are stark. Within just 5 years, the value of goods the company bought in Bengal doubled. And it was all funded by local taxes.
But this new system, this extraction machine, it was clumsy, greedy even. And the impact was, well, it was immediate and devastating.
Oh, completely catastrophic.
Right.
Artisans were forced to sell their goods so cheaply they just abandoned their villages. Peasants couldn't possibly meet the new tax demands. Agriculture just collapsed.
And all of that economic chaos directly fed into one of the worst human tragedies of that time, the famine of 1770.
Yeah, the Great Bengal Famine. We're talking an estimated 10 million deaths.
And million. That's what a third of Bengal's entire population at the time just wiped out.
Unimaginable. And grimly, that disaster is what forces the company's hand. Officials suddenly realized, you can't tax a wasteland. If the economy's destroyed, the revenue vanishes.
So panic sets in. They have to find a way to make agriculture viable again, to get some investment in land, as they put it, just to stabilize their own income.
Which brings us to their first big attempt at a solution, the permanent settlement. Introduced in 1793 by Governor General Cornwallis. This was meant to fix the mess.
Okay, permanent settlement. How did it work?
Well, they basically recognized the existing local power figures, Rajas Talukdars, and designated them as zamindars. Landlords, essentially.
Okay. So the zamindars collected rent from the actual farmers, the ryots.
Correct. And then they paid a revenue sum to the company. And here's the crucial part. That sum was fixed. Permanently.
Permanently fixed. Why? What was the thinking there?
2 main reasons, supposedly. One, it guaranteed a steady, predictable income for the company, even if it wasn't the maximum possible. 2, it was meant to incentivize the zamindars.
Oh, so.
Because if the state's demand was fixed forever, any extra profit the zamindar made by improving the land, increasing yields, that profit was theirs to keep. The state wouldn't ask for more.
Right. Encourage investment. But the sources show it didn't quite pan out that way, especially at the start.
Not at all. The initial fixed revenue demand was set incredibly high. So high that loads of these new zamindaries were immediately auctioned off. The landlords just couldn't pay.
So immediate failure for many. But then there was a longer-term structural issue, too.
Definitely. By the early 1800s, market prices for crops went up, farming expanded, the zamindars' incomes grew significantly.
But the company saw none of that extra wealth because their share was permanently fixed.
Exactly. The company got no benefit from the economic growth. And worse, that whole incentive idea, it mostly failed. Many zamindars didn't invest in the land at all.
What did they do instead?
They just sublet the land, rented it out to layers of tenants and undertenants, charging really high rents and offering zero security. Passive income, basically.
So the person actually farming the land, the riot, got squeezed even harder.
Terribly squeezed. We have H.T. Colebrook writing in 1806 about the abject state of these undertenants, trapped by sky-high rents, often paid in kind, and crippling debt just to get seed to plant. A constant cycle of debt, just barely surviving.
So the permanent settlement was a disaster for the company's bottom line in the long run and oppressive for the cultivator from day one.
Okay.
They had to try something else.
They did. By the early 19th century, it was clear that fixed revenue just wasn't covering the company's growing costs, administration, trade, wars. So they experimented elsewhere.
Where did they look next?
Up north, in the northwestern provinces, what's now Uttar Pradesh. There, Holt Mackenzie came up with the Mahowari settlement around 1822.
Mahowari. Okay, how is that different?
Instead of fixing revenue permanently for one landlord, they assessed the potential revenue of an entire village, or a group of villages, the Mahal.
And who collected it?
The village headman was responsible for collecting the total amount from the villagers and paying it to the company. Crucially, the total demand wasn't fixed forever.
Ah, so it was revised periodically. They learned that lesson at
They
least.
did. It allowed the company to potentially increase its income over time.
Yeah.
Then, down south, there was another system.
Right, in the territories taken after the wars with Tipu Sultan.
Exactly. Captain Alexander Reed and, more famously, Thomas Monroe developed the Rayatwari system.
Rawari. So dealing directly with the Rayat, the cultivator.
Yes. Large zamindar-type landlords weren't as common in the South, so they bypassed that layer. They surveyed individual fields carefully and made the settlement directly with the farmer.
Monroe apparently saw the British role as being like paternal father figures protecting the riots.
It
That
did.
sounds better.
It sounds better. But the motivation, unfortunately, remained the same across all these systems.
Which was?
Maximizing income from the land, the official desire to increase the income. So even in the Rayatwari system, they tended to fix the revenue demand too high.
So different mechanisms, permanent, Mahawari, Rayatwari, but the end result for the peasant.
Depressingly similar, peasants couldn't pay the high rates, they fled the land, villages became deserted. The drive for revenue consistently outweighed sustainable agriculture or peasant welfare.
This constant failure to balance revenue with reality seems to lead to another shift, doesn't it? Away from just tax collection.
Towards actively shaping what was grown, the company realized the land could produce not just revenue, but specific valuable crops that Europe wanted.
Right, crops for export. Things like jute in Bengal, tea in Assam, cotton in Maharashtra.
Sugar in UP, wheat in Punjab, and the one that caused incredible conflict, indigo.
Indigo. Let's get into that. Why was indigo suddenly so important?
It produced this incredibly rich, vibrant blue dye, much, much better than the existing European dye source, which was a plant called woad. Woad produced a kind of pale, dull blue.
And demand in Europe was surging.
Massively. The Industrial Revolution was powering up textile production in Britain. They needed dyes. And just as demand skyrocketed, the traditional suppliers of indigo collapsed.
Where was that?
Mainly the West Indies. Plantations there relied on enslaved labor. The Haitian Revolution, starting in 1791 in Saint-Domingue, basically wiped out that supply chain. America also had disruptions.
So huge demand, collapsing supply, Britain turns to India.
And turns hard. The figures are amazing. By 1810, something like 95% of all indigo imported into Britain came from India.
95%. That must have created a sort of indigo rush.
It absolutely did. Lots of Scotsmen, Englishmen saw huge profits to be made. They came to Bengal, often got loans from the company itself or banks, and became planters.
How did they actually get the indigo grown? What were the systems?
There were two main ways. The first was called Nige cultivation. That's where the planter directly controlled the land, either bought it or rented it.
Okay, direct farming. Why didn't that become the main method?
Several big problems. Indigo needed fertile land, but that land was already densely populated and used for rice. So planters needed large, connected blocks of land, which meant evicting peasants' constant conflict.
Logistical issues too.
Huge ones. Indigo cultivation needed lots of plows and bullocks. Often at the exact same time, peasants needed them for their rice crops. Labor was scarce then. Imagine needing, say, 2,000 plows for a 1,000 bequel plantation. Impractical. So Nige accounted for maybe only 25% of indigo land.
So the main system must have been the other one, the Rayoti system.
Yes, the Rayoti system dominated, and this is where things got really coercive.
How did it work?
The planter basically forced the Rayat, the peasant cultivator, to sign a contract. It was called a setta.
Forced them.
How? Often through pressure from village headmen who were themselves pressured by the planters, or through debt leverage. The contract involved the planter giving a small cash advance, usually at a low interest rate.
Okay, sounds okay so far. What was the catch?
The catch was the advance committed the Rayat to grow indigo on a portion of their land, often 25% or more, usually the best part of their holding. The planter provided the seed and equipment sometimes. The Rayat did all the hard labor.
And the price they got for the indigo.
Ah, there's the real trap. The price paid to the Rayat for the harvested indigo was incredibly low. So low, they could almost never repay the initial cash advance.
So the loan just rolled over? They were perpetually in debt.
Exactly. A new loan was needed for the next season, adding to the debt. It was a cycle they couldn't escape. Plus, planters insisted indigo be grown on the most fertile soil.
The soil needed for rice, their food crop.
Precisely. And indigo has deep roots. It exhausts the soil fertility. After an indigo crop, you often couldn't grow rice there for a while, so the Rayat was forced to use their best land for a crop that paid terribly and damaged the soil for their essential food crop.
It sounds like a system designed for maximum exploitation. Utterly brutal.
It was. Maximum planter profit, maximum riot misery,
And
and eventually something had to give.
which leads us to the Blue Rebellion.
Yes. In March 1859, it just exploded. Thousands upon thousands of riots across Bengal flat out refused to grow indigo. They refused to pay rents to the planters, too.
And it wasn't passive resistance.
Not at all. They attacked indigo factories armed with swords, spears, bows and arrows, whatever they had. Sources even mention women joining in, fighting back against the planters' agents using kitchen tools like pots and pans.
Who were they fighting? The planters themselves.
Sometimes, but mostly the planters' agents, the gamastas who collected debts and supervised cultivation, and the lathials, basically hired thugs the planters used for enforcement. These guys were beaten up, symbols of the oppression.
What gave the riots the courage, the power, to suddenly rise up like this against such an entrenched system?
It seems to have been a convergence of factors. Firstly, sheer desperation. But crucially, they felt they weren't alone. Local zamindars often supported them, partly because they resented the planters becoming powerful local figures themselves.
And didn't they think the British government might be on their side?
Yes, that was critical. After the massive upheaval of the 1857 revolt just 2 years earlier, the British administration was terrified of another popular uprising. The riots sensed this nervousness.
And there was a specific trigger, a rumor.
There was. A local magistrate, Ashley Eden, issued a notice basically saying riots wouldn't be legally compelled to accept indigo contracts against their will. It was meant as a routine legal clarification.
Lucky.
But the word spread like wildfire, transformed into news that Queen Victoria herself had declared that riots should not be forced to sow indigo anymore. This rumor, this perceived official sanction, gave them immense confidence to rebel.
Fascinating how misinformation, or maybe wishful thinking, could spark such a movement. How did the government react?
Well, with the rebellion spreading and intellectuals in Calcutta writing about the horrific conditions faced by the riots, the government had to act. They brought in the military to protect the planters, but they also set up the Indigo Commission to investigate.
An official inquiry. What did it find?
The commission toured the affected areas, took testimonies, and they found overwhelmingly against the planters. They confirmed the coercive methods, the violence of the lathials, the whole rigged system.
Did they acknowledge the economic reality for the riots?
Yes. Critically, they declared that indigo production under the Rayoti system was fundamentally unprofitable for the riots. It simply didn't pay.
So what was the ruling?
The commission said riots had to fulfill any existing contracts they'd sign, but, and this was huge, they had the absolute right to refuse to sign new contracts for indigo in the future.
That must have felt like a massive victory.
It was. You see it in the testimonies. There's one powerful quote from a cultivator named Haji Mullah in June 1860. When the commission asked if he was willing to sow indigo now, he just said, "I am not willing to sow. I would rather beg than sow indigo." That captures the feeling.
Wow. So what happened to indigo in Bengal after that?
It collapsed. Almost immediately. With riots now legally empowered to refuse, the whole system fell apart in Bengal. The planters were forced to shut down their factories there.
Did they give up entirely?
No, they shifted their operations, primarily to Bihar, where unfortunately similar oppressive practices continued for decades. That's the situation Mahatma Gandhi encountered when he went to Champaran in 1917.
So wrapping this up, we've seen this journey from the company becoming tax collector through the failures of the permanent settlement.
So the attempts with Mahalwari and Riapuri, which also ended up squeezing the peasants because the core goal was always maximizing revenue.
And then the shift to forcing cultivation of cash crops like indigo, leading to the intense exploitation under the Rayoti system, and finally, the Blue Rebellion.
It really highlights how these top-down policy decisions, fixed revenue versus variable, settling with landlords versus cultivators, had profound, often devastating, real-world consequences for millions of people trying to survive on the land.
Yeah, it's easy to talk about economic systems in the abstract, but this history shows the brutal human cost when the system is purely extractive. A stark lesson.
Definitely. And maybe here's a final thought to leave you with. The Blue Rebellion was a massive popular uprising, and it did succeed in driving indigo out of Bengal, a regional victory.
But not the final end.
Not quite. The sources suggest the truly fatal blow to the global indigo plantation system came later, from something completely different. Peasant resistance continued, yes, culminating in things like Gandhi's Champaran movement, but alongside that,
Technology.
exactly. The development of synthetic indigo dyes in Germany in the late 19th century. Suddenly, there was a cheaper, more reliable alternative. That's what finally killed off the indigo plantations globally.
So what does that tell us? Mass rebellion achieved a partial victory, but technological disruption ultimately finished the job.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it, about the limits of resistance versus the power of innovation to dismantle entrenched, exploitative economic structures. What systems exist today, perhaps relying on similarly unsustainable or coercive models that are just waiting for a technological shift to make them obsolete? Something to think about.
Indeed. A powerful place to end our deep dive for today.